Have you ever felt like God is calling you to something greater, but you don't know where to start? Have you ever been afraid to let go of the known for the unknown? Well, so did Abraham. He wasn't a faith superhero from the beginning. He was an ordinary man who left Ur of the Chaldeans with a divine promise in his heart and a blank map in his hands. This journey full of faith, human mistakes, fresh starts, miracles, and heavenly encounters didn't just shape his story, it became what we now call a spiritual legacy. And the most amazing part? Every detail has something to do with your life. Yes, with you reading this right now. Get ready to dive into a compelling chronological narrative, packed with practical lessons, examples of courage, hard choices, and surprising plot twists. If you think you already know Abraham's story, it's because you haven't heard it told this way. And by the end, you might discover that the faith that moved this patriarch can move your own steps too. Abraham was 75 years old when God called him. 75, instead of retiring in Haran, he chose to obey an invisible calling, leaving behind his life in Ur of the Chaldeans. All he had was a divine promise that he would become the father of a great nation. Sounds crazy? Maybe, but true faith almost always does. It's like someone today saying, leave everything, grab your backpack, and follow me to a place he'll show you along the way. Can you imagine that happening to you? Still, Abraham trusted and set out with Sarai, Lot, and all his household toward Canaan. He didn't have GPS, but he had inner direction. And that was enough. Wherever he went, Abraham built altars. Not because he was religious in a formal sense, but because he understood the value of God's presence. The altar was a sign that he didn't depend on geography for safety, but on his covenant with the Almighty God. The lesson here? Start where you are, with what you have, even if you can't see the end of the road. Not everything was smooth in Abraham's new walk. Early on, a famine struck the land, and he had to go down to Egypt. There, afraid for his life because of Sarai's beauty, he told a half-truth that she was his sister. It nearly turned into a tragedy. Still, God stepped in, protected Sarai, and Abraham left Egypt wealthier than when he arrived. It's fascinating how even the father of faith faced very human fears. And Abraham had received huge promises, but that didn't stop him from slipping. What does that teach us? That failure doesn't cancel the promise, it just reveals how much we still need to grow and trust. The key is to return to the center of God's will. Back in Canaan, Abraham faced another issue: tension with Lot. Their herds and wealth grew so much that their shepherds began to quarrel. Instead of fighting, Abraham suggested a peaceful separation. Once again, he chose peace, even if it meant losing something. Because when you have a promise, you don't need to fight for land. Abraham could have chosen first. After all, he was older and the leader of the journey. But instead, he let Lot pick whatever land he wanted. Lot, led by what he saw, chose the fertile plains of the Jordan, near Sodom. Abraham, led by faith, took what was left. He knew the value of land lies in the blessing that rests on it, not in its appearance. That generous gesture didn't go unnoticed. Right after, God reaffirmed his promise. He said all the land north to south, east to west would belong to Abraham and his descendants. And more than that, they would be countless. This was when the divine promise began to take on deeper dimensions. What seemed like a loss became a sign of spiritual inheritance. Abraham kept walking, building altars, strengthening his covenant with the Almighty. His faith wasn't based on logic, but on the word he had received. A faith that doesn't cling to what the eyes see, but to what the heart believes. A faith that inspires, teaches, and transforms. When Lot was captured in a war between kings, Abraham didn't hesitate. He gathered 318 trained men from his household and went to rescue him. Yes, Abraham wasn't just spiritual, he was strategic, brave, and loyal. The father of faith was also a man of action when the time called for it. Faith, in this case, meant movement. The rescue was a success. Abraham defeated the enemy kings, freed Lot, and recovered all the goods. On his way back, he was greeted by Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God, who blessed him. Abraham then gave him a tithe of everything. acknowledging that his victory came from God. This was a spiritual high point. Soon after, the king of Sodom offered Abraham riches, but he refused. He didn't want anyone to say, Sodom made Abraham rich. His heart was rooted in something greater than status or power. That decision shows the kind of integrity that builds legacy. It teaches us that honor isn't negotiated, it's cultivated day by day. Despite all the blessings, Abraham still had no heir. In an intimate moment with God, he poured out his heart, "What will you give me, since I remain childless?" God answered clearly his heir would come from his own body, not a servant. Abraham believed, and that faith was counted as righteousness. That's when the covenant began to take shape. God then asked him to prepare a sacrifice. Abraham split animals in two, and at nightfall, a flame passed between the pieces. This act sealed an eternal covenant. God revealed that Abraham's descendants would spend 400 years as strangers and slaves, but would leave with great wealth. It was a promise that stretched beyond generations across time and history. Here, Abraham's faith expanded beyond his own life. The promise was no longer just about him. It became a spiritual legacy that would last for centuries. We learn that not every promise is fulfilled in our lifetime, but each one builds the eternal purpose of God. Time passed, and the promise of a son seemed more and more distant. Sarai, already old and distressed, had an idea to offer her servant Hagar to bear a child in her place. It was a common practice in that culture, but it wasn't God's plan. Abraham agreed, and Ishmael was born. The problem? This human solution brought tension into their home. The relationship between Sarai and Hagar quickly fell apart. Now a mother of Abraham's child, Hagar began to despise Sarai. Sarai, in turn, felt humiliated and wronged. Living together became unbearable. Once again, we see that trying to help a promise through our own strategies can bring painful consequences. Even so, God did not reject Ishmael. On the contrary, he promised to make a great nation out of him too. This shows the mercy of the Almighty God. He remains faithful to his promise, but also cares for the results of our failures. Ishmael is part of Abraham's legacy, a reminder that divine grace reaches even our missteps. Then God appeared to Abraham again with a major update. He would not only reaffirm the promise, but also change their identities. Abram, which meant exalted father, became Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai became Sarah, meaning princess. These were not just name changes, they were destiny shifts. It was time for a new beginning. Even at almost 100 years old, Abraham received the promise that Sarah would give birth to his son Isaac. And yes, he laughed not out of disbelief, but because it seemed impossible and wonderful at the same time. Sarah also laughed quietly inside the tent. But God, who doesn't depend on human logic, reaffirmed at the appointed time, "I will return, and Sarah will have a son." At that very moment, God instituted circumcision as a visible sign of the covenant. Every male in Abraham's household was circumcised, including Ishmael. It was as if God were saying, now that your identities have been renewed, it's time to live according to this new reality. When a promise feels distant, maybe what's missing is an internal transformation to receive it. One ordinary afternoon, 3 visitors appeared at Abraham's tent. He welcomed them with hospitality, not realizing at first that they were heavenly messengers. He prepared a banquet and personally served them, a rare gesture for a patriarch. One of the angels announced within a year, Sarah would have a son. It was confirmation of what had seemed impossible. Sarah, listening from behind the tent, laughed to herself. After all, she was long past childbearing age. But God heard her laugh and asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" This moment reveals something powerful about God's character. He doesn't just promise, he also confronts our limits with a question that still echoes today. Do you really believe? Right after, the visitors revealed the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, in a bold act of compassion and justice, interceded for Lot and his family. He pleaded with God, trying to save the righteous from destruction. It's a powerful scene that shows true faith also includes empathy, courage, and the boldness to fight for others before the Almighty. And then, at the appointed time, Isaac was born. The divine promise was finally fulfilled, and the laughter that once expressed doubt became pure joy. Sarah exclaimed, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me." The birth of Isaac wasn't just the beginning of a lineage, it was proof that God keeps his promises, even when they seem impossible. But the joy came with tension. Ishmael, now a teenager, mocked Isaac during a celebration. Sarah didn't hesitate, she demanded that Hagar and the boy be sent away. Abraham was troubled Ishmael was still his son, but God comforted him, assuring that Ishmael would also be cared for and become a great nation. Hagar and Ishmael left for the wilderness. When the water ran out, Hagar moved away, not wanting to watch her son die. Then, an angel appeared and opened her eyes to a well. God sustained them and fulfilled his promise. This part of the story shows that even outside the original plan, divine care remains because God sees, hears, and acts. One day, God tested Abraham. He asked for something any father would consider unthinkable: to sacrifice Isaac. Yes, the son of the promise, the one Abraham had waited for decades. Without questioning, Abraham got up early, prepared the wood, and journeyed to Mount Moriah. His faith was so solid that he believed, if necessary, God could raise Isaac from the dead. When they arrived, Isaac carried the wood on his back and asked, "Father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham replied with a prophetic phrase God will provide. As he raised the knife, an angel stopped him. The test was over. A ram caught in a bush was provided as a substitute. Once again, God provided. After this extreme act of obedience, God reaffirmed his promise Abraham's descendants would be as countless as the stars and bring blessing to all nations. That moment sealed Abraham as the true father of faith. And it teaches us that real faith isn't just about trusting, it's about obeying even when the heart trembles and logic doesn't make sense. Sarah, his companion throughout the journey, died at the age of 127. It was a time of deep mourning for Abraham. But even in grief, he acted wisely. He legally bought the cave of Machpelah from the Hittites to bury her. This act wasn't just one of love, it was a landmark, the first piece of the promised land Abraham truly owned. The cave of Machpelah became a quiet symbol of God's promise. There he buried his wife, and later, he would be buried there too. It wasn't just a tomb, it was a seed of inheritance. Abraham never saw the full conquest of Canaan, but he sealed his faith by purchasing part of it with his own hands. A reminder that legacy begins with small acts of faith. Even in mourning, Abraham continued honoring his covenant with God. His pain didn't cancel his purpose, it deepened his conviction. This part of the story shows that the end of a chapter isn't the end of the journey. Grief may visit the tent, but the promise stays alive in every decision, every choice, every step still to be taken. With Sarah gone and the promise now focused on Isaac, Abraham decided to find a wife for his son. But it couldn't be just anyone, she had to be from his own people, his own faith. So he sent his trusted servant on the delicate mission of finding the right woman. The servant left with camels, gifts, and a lot of prayer. Arriving in Nahor, the servant made a specific prayer that the right woman would offer water to him and to the camels. Before he even finished praying, Rebekah appeared and did exactly that. It wasn't luck, it was divine guidance. The servant, moved, realized that God had guided his steps. Rebekah, in turn, agreed to go without hesitation, just as Sarah once did with Abraham. When Isaac first saw her, his heart found comfort after his mother's death. They married, and the promised lineage was renewed. That moment shows that faith also manifests in the right connections at the right time. That when we surrender the details to God, He orchestrates encounters that no amount of human planning could arrange. Even after Sarah's death, Abraham lived on. He married Keturah and had other children, who became other nations, spreading Abraham's blood across many regions. But despite the new family, he never lost sight of who the promised son was, Isaac. And that made all the difference in the legacy he would leave. With wisdom, Abraham gave gifts to Keturah's sons and sent them eastward, away from Canaan. But to Isaac, he gave everything. This decision shows that Abraham wasn't just a man of faith, he was a spiritual strategist. He understood that the divine promise had to be preserved with clarity, without mixing, without straying. At 175 years old, Abraham died. He was buried by Isaac and Ishmael in the cave of Machpelah, beside Sarah. His story ended in honor and fulfillment not because he lived a perfect life, but because he lived with obedience, vision, and faith. The father of faith teaches us that more important than starting well is finishing with purpose and leaving a trail of hope for generations to come. Abraham's story isn't just an ancient narrative, it's a personal invitation to reflect, where have you placed your faith? Would you trust God enough to leave your comfort zone, like Abraham left you are? Would you give up something precious like he did with Isaac, believing God would provide? Are you living like someone who believes in the promise, or like someone trying to control the outcome? What kind of spiritual legacy are you building for your descendants? What needs to change today so that your life points to something eternal, like Abraham's? If this journey spoke to your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've got more deep, transformative, and purpose-filled content coming your way. And remember, the same faith that transformed Abraham can transform your story too.